Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. Okay, I think we're going to start a new SIF today. The last thing that we had seen is whether or not a person can charge for services rendered without being asked. And we explained that there are certain times that he can, but he's at a disadvantage as far as how much he can, how much he's entitled to be compensated. Okay, so let us continue. We are on Sif Zion, and we're talking about a person. We're talking about the laws of stealing. And what you're going to see now is a surprising little twist here in Sif Zion. Ucheshabame atzmo lasos tshuva v'litein damim. That if a person comes on their own voluntarily and expresses remorse for having committed a crime of stealing, and he says, I'm ready to make restitution, tzivu chachamim shelo lekabel mimenu. The rabbis made a takana to not accept the restitution from him. Why? Kedei shelo yimna milasos tshuva, so that he doesn't refrain from doing tshuva. Now, under what conditions do the rabbis say don't accept the stolen goods from him? Im hugana vogazlan meforsam sha'asakav bekach utshuvaso kasher. If he is a well-known, long-standing ganav, and it's going to be very difficult for him to make proper restitution for all that he's done over the years. So then they said that you should have some kind of clemency for him, for the theft, so that you can allow him to rehabilitate himself. She'im yikablu mimenu lo yishar lo me'uma. Because if we do hold him to make proper restitution for everything that he's done in the past, he'll be left with nothing, and it'll be too difficult for him to do tshuva. Lefichach tzivu limchol lo kidei liftoach lo pesach sheyavo lasos tshuva ulevakesh sheyimchalu lo. And therefore, the rabbis basically made a takana. They made an act that we want to try and give everyone an opportunity to do tshuva, and sincerely ask people to forgive him. And so therefore, in a situation where the guy has many, many people that he's stolen from, like he was a professional bandit or a professional thief, so then we have to try and create some kind of clemency to allow him the opportunity to do tshuva. V'imhu omer, afal pisha mechaltem li ritzoni l'shalim v'latzeis yidei shamayim, ein mochin biyad misha mekabel mimen. But if he says on his own, even though you've given me clemency and you've forgiven me, I still want to fulfill my heavenly obligations and pay each and every one of you back. So then we don't protest if individuals come forward and say, yes, actually, I'd like to get restitution, please. Aval im hageneva o hagezela kayemes, ein tzorich limcholo klal. He says, if the original stolen item is still intact, so then you don't have to be moichel, you don't have to forgive the stolen item, because it's right there in his possession. So that you don't have to forgive. You don't have to be moichel. V'im hanigzel chayev la'acher v'ein lo bameh lifroa lo yimchol b'chol inyan kedei sheyifra lebalei chovo shelo. And finally, another exception to this rule is if the victim has debts and he owes other people money. So by being moichel, he's going to further cause his inability to pay back his own creditors. So then he should not be moichel. Then he has to tell the ganaf, I'm sorry, I know you want to do tshuva, but if you hadn't stolen from me, I would have paid back all my creditors already. So then you for sure should not be moichel the ganaf in that kind of situation. So basically, I mean, it's sort of like a clemency program for habitual criminals. is what the Chachamim were trying to do in this kind of circumstance. Now, what is the basis for this? So it actually is a Gemara in Bava Kama that I'm going to bring up for you now, so that we can actually learn. That's based on a story that happened in the times of Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, who lives in the 2nd century of the Common Era. And he actually felt that this was the proper thing to do based on a certain situation that happened in his lifetime. Let me bring it up for you. Daf Tzadi Dalet on the base. Tanu Rabbana. The Brisa, oh, I'm sorry, you don't have it here. Let me bring it up. I hope everyone can see now. Tanu Rabbanan, where my cursor is. The rabbis taught, Hagazlanin umalve beribis shehechziru. If a person is a bandit, or he lends money with interest, and they want to do tshuva, ein makablin mehem, we're supposed to at least initially refuse to accept the offer. And if you do accept from them, then the Chachamim are not happy with you because you've put up an obstacle for them to do tshuva. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, b'mei Rabbi nishnes mishnazu. So Rabbi Yochanan says that this halacha, or this brisa, was taught in the lifetime of Rebbe. Titania, Ma'isa ba'adam echad shebikesh lasos tshuva. So as the brisa says, there was once a person who was a professional, he was a habitual thief, and he was feeling pangs of remorse, and he wanted to do tshuva. So Amrlei Ishto, Reika, Imata Oisa tshuva, Afilu Avneit Eino Shelcha. So his wife says to him, see, usually they blame the wife for these kinds of things. His wife says to him, "You empty person." She said, if you're going to do tshuva, you're not even going to be left with your belt to hold up your pants. So v'nimna v'lo asa tshuva. So as a result, he withdrew his initial thinking, and he didn't do tshuva. Ba'osa shah amru, and at that moment, when the rabbis found out about what this back and forth was about, they said, "Hagazlonim umalvi ribis shechiziru ein makablin mehem." They said that the thieves and robbers and people who lend money on interest, if they want to do tshuva, it's best not to accept the money from them. And whoever does, the chachamim are not happy with it. Okay, I showed you this Gemara for a specific reason, as we'll see as we get further into the halacha, because we're going to see that it's not so simple that this halacha always applies in every time. But let's go back to the Imrei Yaakov, and now take a look at some of the commentary. Okay. So the Imrei Yaakov says as follows: that if a person comes of his own volition to do tshuva, you should not accept from him. But let's say he's not coming to do tshuva on his own, right? In other words, he hasn't voluntarily stepped forward. But rather the victim has to sue him or take him to court, take him to Beis Din. So then there is no leniency and there's no clemency. Because of Harambam, and the Rambam writes further in the laws of tshuva, the averos ben adam lechavero kagon hachovel es chavero o hamakalel chavero o hagozl v'chayotze bahen, that any sin that is between man and his fellow man, such as if you injure someone, or you curse him, or you steal from him, or you do anything else to cause him loss or pain, eino nimchalo la'olam ad sheyitem lechaveru mashu chayiv lo v'yiratzehu. You're not forgiven until you make restitution and you appease your friend, get him to forgive you. And the Rambam also writes that even when you do make restitution, you still have not gotten full forgiveness from Hashem until the guy actually forgives you for having done the act. It's not just enough to plunk down the bag of money that you stole from him, but you actually have to ask him mechila and sincerely have remorse, and for the guys to sincerely forgive you in order to be forgiven by heaven. So while at the same time, we have this principle that a person who wishes to do tshuva, we should not accept from him. Now, again, it's not always this case. There are many exceptions to this case. It's just that this is giving us a guideline that if we know that it's going to be too difficult for a person to do tshuva, by holding him to the letter of the law, there are times when we can grant a person clemency. So, but at the same time, if he wants to fulfill his heavenly obligations, he's going to have to figure out a way to pay back every single penny that he stole. And so Tzivu Chachamim, so the Chachamim made this sort of institution or this ordinance. Pirush Chazal Tiknu Shelo Yikablu Mimenu Kidei Liftoach Lo Petach L'Darchei HaTshuva. What this means is that our sages instituted, don't accept from him so that you can open up a doorway to the pathways of tshuva. Like we just saw in the Gemara, if you close those pathways of tshuva from him and you don't allow him the opportunity to do tshuva, so the chachamim are unhappy with you because you had the potential to help somebody come closer to Hashem, and because you were a hardliner, right? You closed the door on this fellow. But then in the same breath, the Imrei Yaakov writes in the next halacha, Shelo lekabel mimenu ve'afal pi she'ein mekabel mimenu, even though we don't accept from him, I guess initially, mikol makom hu chayav lahachzir kedei latzeis yedei shamayim. He still, like we just saw in the Rambam, he still has the obligation to make restitution in order to fulfill his heavenly obligation. Ella shemidas chasidus shelo lekabel mimenu kedei shelo yimna mimenu hatshuva. But it's just an act of piety not to accept. In other words, when the rabbis say don't do this, it's not like a strong halacha that you're obligated not to accept it. We're recommending that you don't accept it so that you can give this fellow the entree to do tshuva. He calls it a midas chasidus, an act of piety, not to accept it. It doesn't mean that you're a rasha, that you've committed an aveira if you accept from him, but you have to look at the situation and see what would be the compassionate thing to do to a fellow in this kind of situation. And then he writes, Yesh omrim deha'idna b'chol gavni mekablu mehem umotzin ba'al korchan v'yordin l'nichsehem. And some say that today, in general, this halacha doesn't apply. And it only applied at one point in history, v'tzarech iyun. And this requires analysis. It's not clear. It's not clear. Now, why is it not clear? So I'm going to show you a Tosfos in just a second, and we'll see why it's not clear. How and when or what the scope of this law is. And ultimately, the last Imrei Yaakov is tshuva so kasha. It's very hard for a person to do tshuva if he's a habitual, long-time thief or criminal. The gazlan kazeh, kol asher lo yaspik lo kishiyachzu l'chol echad misha gazlo. He says the reason is because if a person has been a career criminal, then, in all likelihood, everything in his possession is stolen or through ill-gotten gains, and it's going to be impossible for him to make restitution even with everything that he has. Va'afim hu ashir. He says, and even if he's wealthy, we're concerned that if we hold him to the letter of the law and return everything that he stole, he's not going to be able to do tshuva. Gam enu yodeya lemi yashiv, and not only that, but he's also not going to know how to make restitution to every single person he stole from. He probably doesn't have a record of all of his victims. Keven sha'asakav bekach v'gazal harbe, because since he's been doing this for such a long time and he's stolen from so many different parties, how can we expect him to do proper tshuva? So that's why I call it, there's like a clemency program, like a pardon program that exists in the eyes of Chazal, that a person can be pardoned. Now, this is not the same as declaring bankruptcy. I just want to clarify. Person declares there is no such thing as bankruptcy protection in halacha. If a person is a debtor and he owes money to people, he cannot declare bankruptcy and then absolve himself from paying back. What we're talking about here is a person who wants to do tshuva and rehabilitate his life of crime. That's a totally different kind of concept. There's a special kind of remedy that is created for people who wish to truly be penitent and be rehabilitated. Now, of course, like we said, it's only if a person comes forward on their own. If a person is finally implicated by the law, and then all of a sudden he says, oh, but I want to do tshuva, don't take my money, right? Then, of course, we're not going to listen to him because it's probably all just a fake, right? So it has to be, the Beis Din has to first ascertain that he's truly sincere. And then we have to have compassion on a guy. Okay. So,
Rabbi,
yeah.
I get a little something you just said there. So if I, as a Jewish owner of a business, and I sell to a Jewish retailer, let's say, and then they, for whatever reasons, decides they want to clean their slate and go bankrupt and then continue in business again, does that mean he still, even though the law of the land protects him in a certain way, does he still halachically still owe me and should be obligated to still pay me?
My understanding is yes, he's still obligated according to halacha to pay you what he owes you. If it was a private deal between the two of you, and he owes you a certain amount of money, he still has an obligation to pay you that money even after he declared bankruptcy. If you're dealing with another frum Jew and he has an appreciation for the halacha, then the answer is yes. He can't just seek bankruptcy protection. Bankruptcy protection will absolve him from paying back according to the law of the land, but it doesn't absolve him according to halacha if he still owes you the money. And it's proper to remind him of that and say to him, listen, I recognize that you have been absolved by the law of the land from paying me, but you should know that the halacha doesn't have bankruptcy protection. I still expect you to pay me back that money. You maybe don't pay it to me when you don't have it, but when you do get back on your feet, I still expect to be paid back every penny on the dollar.
Thank you.
Okay. So why is this such an ambiguous halacha? Because it's very subjective to know when to apply it and when not to apply it, and it can't be applied in all situations. And here's the point that Tosfos makes. Tosfos says that if you look carefully at the language of this Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan said that this Mishnah or this teaching was taught in the lifetime of Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, Bimei Rebbe. In the times of Rebbe, this halacha was taught. So what does that mean? Of what significance is it for us to know that this was taught in the lifetime of Rebbe? So Tosfos quotes Rabbeinu Tam as saying, Omer Rabbeinu Tam, Delo lefanav velo la'acharav, ella ledoro dafka tanan, atike. He says this was not meant to be a long-standing ordinance. It was only done during Rebbe's lifetime that they made this sort of ordinance that you should not accept money back from a penitent thief, mishum ma'aser shahaya, because of the incident that happened in Rebbe's lifetime. Velo ledoros haboim, and it was not meant to be a permanent law for all future generations. Dahamaisim b'chol yom, and to illustrate, Tosfos says, we see that there are many instances in the Gemara where we do shemekablim min hagazlanim v'danin dinei gezelos, that we do accept restitution from people who voluntarily step forward to do tshuva, and we regularly rule on laws of theft. Ki hahi degazol padana detura lekaman. There's an example that the Gemara itself illustrates in a couple of pages about a guy who stole and then wanted to make restitution. Vaharhu narsha'a deganav sifra, another fellow stole a particular scroll. Vahahu raya de beperakama de bava mitzia, the nascha de Rebbe Abba, the Omar Nami be'izehu neshech, the ribis ketzutza yotza b'dayanim, that if a person charges money with interest, he is entitled, then the victim is entitled to full compensation. Ulakach lo parach lekamen elami braisos tahabashana Rebbe Chia shaya talmido sherebi, and that's the reason why in the whole Gemara over here, the only challenges to this halacha are only braisos that are taught by Rebbe Chia, who lived in Rebbe's lifetime. V'lo hiksha mimasnisim dekatani mishalim kishas hagazela lefisha mishnayos hayu kodem Rebbe. He says, and it doesn't ask questions from other mishnayos that existed before Rebbe's lifetime, because this ordinance only existed for a certain finite amount of Jewish history. We're not going to go through the rest of the Tosfos, but I just wanted to point out to you that according to Tosfos, this halacha should not even be in the Shulchan Aruch, because it only applied historically to one specific period in Jewish history. So why is it in the Shulchan Aruch? Because there are other Tosafists, and there's this Tosfos continues by quoting the Ri, which is another Tosafist, and he learns differently. He says that this has a longer lasting effect. But the bottom line is that you have to know how to apply it. It can't be applied in all situations, this halacha. And there has to be a certain amount of discretion that is granted to the parties who are the victims to make a determination when it's appropriate to demand that the person make full restitution, and when to go easy on him because he's trying to rehabilitate himself, and we want to give him an opportunity to do tshuva. So it's not a clear halacha at all. Okay. Let me just see if there's anything else. No, there's no likutim here. Okay.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Could we get the next 20 pages, please? Because the next SIF is only partially available to us.
Yes, I will. I just noticed that this morning that we're on page 19. So I will send you, Blinetter, on the WhatsApp today. I will send you the next 20 pages, okay?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Barry. All right, folks. So I think we'll hold it here for today. I got to go get ready for my next year, and we'll see you, Mirz Hashem, tomorrow.